of careerlearning.com. And I have the great opportunity to have Rob Meiksins. He is going to be talking about beyond outcomes and nonprofit success. And today we can't see Rob, but he's there. Trust me.
Hi.
Um, there he is. Rob has been working with boards and governance for many years, an executive consultant instructor. He is a governance instructor with BoardSource, a licensed consultant with Standards for Excellence. He has done this for a long time ago, from a long time. Anyway, he's a fascinating teacher. We have an upcoming class coming up on basic governance for new board directors on May 28th. And so Rob is going to talk a little bit about nonprofits, and there's some resources down at the bottom if you want to download the slideshow, and and we will have any questions and answers. Just put them in the Q&A or in chat, and I will relay those to Rob. Okay, so that said, Rob, take it away.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, this one's actually an opportunity for me to do a little bit of a rant and rave. I've already warned Blake about that one. So, on May 28th, I'm going to be a little bit more considered in trying to be an instructor. This one, I want to rant because I think outcomes really are one of the most horrible things that have ever happened to the nonprofit sector. And so I wanted to try to spend a little bit of time going over why I feel that way. So what are outcomes and why do we have them? But then why do I hate them so much? But really what we got to figure out is how can we learn from what's wrong about outcomes and the negative things that they impose on our sector in order to be able to come up with a more fruitful and more positive and more beneficial way of measuring the success that we have as organizations in the sector. I know we got to do that. So is there a better way than outcomes? So let's spend a little bit of time learning what's wrong with them and then moving on. So where did outcomes come from? They actually came from the business world. It's not a nonprofit thing. It was coming from really the same place that the Industrial Revolution and the assembly line concept came from. It's businesses and management wanting things to be more efficient. It's more streamlined, more scientific, more let's have this happen, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And it was really about 1990, apparently, that they began to move into the nonprofit sector. And it's really foundations, or I keep saying foundations when I should really be saying funders. So if you ever hear me say foundations, just think funders. That really the funders wanted us to be proving to them that their investment is being well spent, that they are having a positive impact with the money that they are giving us in the nonprofit sector. So it's not something that we came up with. It's something that was imposed on us. It reminds me a lot of I don't know if you've read Hard Times by Charles Dickens, but it's there's a character in there by the name of Mr. Gradgrind, who was a school principal and a businessman, and he was just everything had to be about facts. There's a quote here that I'm going to read: "Facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else and root out everything else. It has to be facts." Well, okay. What you're going to hear me saying a lot in this webinar for 30 minutes is life's not that simple. There are things that happen around it. There are things that are confusing, that are messy, that are just horrible. Life isn't about facts. There are things that happen. There's more to it than that. And what we're doing in the nonprofit sector isn't that easy to measure because we're just trying to make the world a little bit better. And even almost as soon as well, what are why what are outcomes? And I have to back off a little bit and say thank you. I remember it was somewhere by maybe 1995, 97 that in Milwaukee, where I was living at the time, we started hearing about outcomes, and it was the United Way that was promoting it. And they were talking about the theory of change, and they were saying that counting the number of people whose lives you've touched is not really enough, that you've really got to start spending time looking at the measures of success. You were given your nonprofit status and you're being given investment by the community around you in order to do some work that you had written down in your articles of incorporation that you filed with the state, or the form that you filed with the IRS to get your 501c3. So let's hear about that. Let's actually measure, are we having the impact that we said we were going to have? So that's actually a good thing. So thank you to Outcomes, and in that case, the United Way, for getting us to start thinking about that. And if you look at how the theory of change thing works, what they want you to do is they want you to define your goals, which is your mission statement or your statement of purpose. And that's a whole nother discussion that I'd like to have at some point. And, work that through and tell us about it. And then we want you to make a plan. So how do we take the current circumstances and where's the systemic change that you want to have? And what are the steps you want to take along the way to get from where we are to where you want to be? And tell us about it. So then we also want you to track your income, your impact along the way. How are you actually doing? Are you being successful? Are you achieving the goals that you set out for yourself? And tell us about it. Okay, the theory of change is a great concept, but what it really implies is that you're going to be able to go on a straight line from where we are now to where we want to be, the systemic change that we like to have. And we're going to take this step, then this step, then this step, then this step, and then we're going to be there. How many times has that ever happened in your life? How many times have you ever written down a plan and made it work exactly in that straight line? Things happen, things change. And so if you're going to do a theory of change, you're going to have to build in where are the sidetracks that we're going to have to take? Where are the roadblocks that we're going to hit? They're going to force us to go around it. So it's not that simple. We can't just do the theory of change in a straight line. We're going to have to think about it a different way. And actually, from the beginning, people started arguing against it. There's a guy named William Shambra, who at the time was working at the Bradley Foundation, and I think he's moved on to the Heritage Foundation. I could not be more opposed to him politically, but his approach to the sector, I actually like. And if you read this one, he's saying our vast, bewildering, and ever growing profusion of nonprofits in all their naive, amateurish, bumbling, redundant glory may appall those who want to see social services delivered in neat, orderly, rationalized, and centralized way. This is a small price to pay for the education and democratic self government provided by our thick, organic, local network of civic associations. So, what he's telling us is that, yeah, the nonprofits are messy, it's confusing, they are redundant, but it's a beautiful system because it's local, it's democratic, it's the community investing and working with itself. So, yeah, it's a mess, but gee whiz, it's also really kind of cool. So, thanks, Mr. Schomburg, for saying that. All right. So outcomes. How do I hate thee? Let me count the ways. Actually, as I was thinking about and preparing for this presentation, I actually came up with other ways that I hate outcomes beyond the four that I wrote here when I first submitted the slide deck to Career Learning Academy. But let's talk about these ones. And we're going to go into some depth on each of these, or I'll go into some depth on my little soapbox here. They're based on a false limiting binary equation. They rely on empirical measurement. They lead to Moneyball philanthropy, which is a wonderful concept. And they isolate nonprofits on an island. So let me go into a little bit of depth on these things so that we can understand a little bit about what I mean. And this is where we can begin to learn if why these things are having a negative impact on the sector. Let's see if we can turn that around at the end and turn it into something more positive and come up with a different way of measuring success. So the binary equation is we're going from a 0 to a 1. We are going from a negative to a positive. So it's a 1 or a 0. It's a yes or a no. It's a win or a loss. And again, life really just isn't that simple. Let me say, I'm going to use this image quite a bit as we go along. We're a youth serving agency, and particularly we're working with young people who have a drug addiction, who have a problem, they have a habit and they're using. And what we have done is we've gone to a foundation and said, a funder, hey, we have a way of doing this, and we think it works really well. And what we would love you to do is to give us $50,000, and we'll see if we can give you 25 kids who are no longer addicted. And so we go off and we get the money and we start doing our work. And yay, sure enough, we have 25 young people that are no longer addicted to drugs. We have 30 we have 5 others that maybe it didn't work, and we'll go back and we'll continue to work with them. But look, funder, we got these 25 and it worked. And then all of a sudden they give us a little bit more money, and so we go off and we continue to do the work. But a year later, what happens? We find out that of those 25, 5 are using again. Do we go back and change our report and be successful instead of 25 out of 30 times, only 20 out of 30 times? No, we don't do that. We don't change the history. Do we then turn around and those five that are now using again and we work with them, do they become the next round of positives, even though they had gone from a positive to a negative and now they're, you get the point I'm saying here. We're seeing things in ones and zeros, and we're also seeing things in a short term kind of way. Outcomes, when they were originally presented, were intended to be long term thinking, but the way that the funders are using it now, they may give us funding for a maximum of 3 years, but they want us to report in 12 and sometimes even 6 month increments on our outcomes. Life doesn't work that way. It's not on, off, 1, 0 in a short term kind of way. Life isn't that simple. I keep saying it, right? Moneyball philanthropy. It almost killed baseball, Moneyball. In fact, in many ways, it has killed baseball. Have you ever watched the national broadcasts of baseball? All they talk about are metrics like spin rate and launch angle and war. War is wins against replacement, over replacement or something. And I don't even understand how they do that one. How do they know that because this person is playing, they would win five more games than if somebody replaced them? I don't understand that. But it's that whole concept of let's look at the metrics, let's do this kind of analytical thing. And if we can get people to do launch angle, they're going to be better baseball players and the team is going to be better. And it doesn't actually work that way. We'll get back to that in a minute. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about with Moneyball philanthropy is it's kind of like the funders have turned it into a vending machine. So if I put $5,000 in the slot, what comes out at the other end? It's like, if I invest in this baseball player and teach him how about launch angle, we'll get five more home runs out of him. It's just too, if I do this, then this will happen. And it doesn't work that way. And it also makes us turn our clients that we're serving into a commodity that we are selling to the philanthropists, to the funders. We're saying, give me $5,000 and I'll give you five kids that aren't addicted to drugs anymore. Give me $10,000 and I'll give you 10 kids that aren't addicted to drugs anymore. It's, I know that's a crude way of saying it, but it's kind of how it feels like. It's that whole concept of poverty pimps, right? So that's kind of one of the ways of thinking about it. And then, that leads right into the idea of empirical measurement, that everything has to be boiled down to numbers and looking at very specific statistics. And this is, again, that whole thing about metrics in baseball and the Moneyball concept. I look at the Milwaukee Brewers, and I lived in Milwaukee for 30 odd years. I grew up a Mets fan, but became a Brewers fan when I lived in Milwaukee for that long. And over the last few years, every time the pundits, the ESPN or MLB analysts looked at the Milwaukee Brewers, they looked at those metrics and they said, the team's really not that good. They're not going to win. They're going to probably come in third, maybe even fourth. They may even be worse than Pittsburgh this year. But every year until this year, the team won. They won the division. They got to the playoffs. They almost made it to the World Series a few years ago against the and lost to the Dodgers. And why is that? And I think the answer, and this is something that we need to learn in the sector, was a guy named Willy Adames, who was our shortstop. And the metrics on Willy Adames aren't that great. He bats 225. He hits a few home runs. He's a pretty good defender. But what you found was when you looked in the dugout, he was talking to everybody. There was smiles on everybody's face. When he was standing at second base after hitting a double, he was talking to the other team's shortstop. He was talking to the umpire. He was having fun. Every time the Brewers won and there was the post-game interview with the star of the game, it's Willy Adames who would be dumping the bucket of Gatorade on that kid's head, on that player's head. Everybody was having fun. There was just a life to the team. This year, he's in San Francisco, and you look in the dugout of the Brewers, and things are a lot more businesslike, a lot more serious, and they're not winning. On the other hand, San Francisco is winning. How do we track that? That is not something that is empirically measurable. The fact that he did that, that he has that impact on people around him. There are just some things that can't be measured empirically. When outcomes were coming up, I was in Milwaukee, and I was running a leadership program. And how do you measure the leadership development of somebody's development as a positive leader? Well, I could say that maybe, now they have 40 people working for them instead of 30. Well, that's not really, are they a good leader? Um, how do I measure that empirically? How do I count that? How do I put it into numbers? Same with working in theater. And I worked in theater professionally for 11 years. And I can't tell you when I was in theater, what I was trying to do was to help people see things in a new way. I was trying to help people understand the world in a new way, or I was maybe just trying to entertain them and get their mind off of things and give them a break for a minute. How do I reach into their minds and count that? How do I turn that into a number? I could do butts and seats. I could do a laugh meter and see how loud they were laughing, or a cry meter and see how loudly they were crying, how many tears were falling. But that's not ultimately what I was trying to do here. I was really trying to do things that were about seeing the world in a different way, or having a break from your realities. How do I measure that empirically? I just don't know. To this day, I don't know how to do that. Life just isn't that simple.
Mhm.
Um, and if there are questions coming up, like, feel free to interrupt me.
No, no questions yet, but feel free, guys, to jump in.
Okay. And if you totally disagree with something I'm saying, say, come up with that too, because that's great. Isolating nonprofits. When we do this, and this is actually something that we do to ourselves in the nonprofits, now that we've adopted this thing of outcomes, we say, okay, here's the work that I did. This is my organization did this work. We got those 25 kids off of drugs. Aren't we great? And we did it. We're kind of forgetting everything else that's going on around them, or we're choosing to ignore it. Like, maybe some business opened up down the street, so now more of the family members, the parents, are working and are bringing in a little bit more money into the house, and things are a little more comfortable, and maybe the food that's on the table is a little bit better. Or maybe there's a new teacher in the school that has a really good way of working with the kids and making a positive environment in the classroom for them. All kinds of things could be changing around them that are having a positive impact, instead of just us doing it. So we're putting it, we are using outcomes, or we are allowing outcomes to put us on an island as a nonprofit, instead of seeing ourselves as part of that messy, redundant conglomeration that Shambra was talking about at the beginning. And we're doing this all by ourselves. And it just doesn't work that way. Again, life isn't that simple. We have to see ourselves in context somehow. There's an organization that I was working with in Milwaukee, and they had a kind of a very, very big approach. They had a lot of programs, and what they found was that the programs were really had become siloed, and they weren't talking to each other. And so, they were in one program, we're finding a kid who was acting out and was a troubled kid, and was, being, starting to be violent or whatever. And what they hadn't heard, which was what another program knew, was that there was a divorce going on in the family. So if they had talked to each other, if these organizations, if you take it out of a single organization and talk about it as a whole network, if we can find out what the other organization knows about this community that we're serving, we may be able to serve them better. We may be able to work together. We may be able to learn from what they know, and we can share what we know with them. So instead of seeing ourselves on an island, we got to see ourselves as part of a larger system that is addressing the circumstances around whatever it is that we're trying to work on in our statement of purpose or our mission statement.
Mhm.
It simplifies things. Life isn't that negative. Okay. Um, the Buddha image, and if you see the outcome in the road, kill it, is actually a reference to a Buddhism phrase. If you see the Buddha in the road, kill it. And really what it's about is, if you're seeing somebody telling you this is what enlightenment looks like, they're wrong. If you tell yourself this is what enlightenment looks like, you're wrong. It's something that happens more organically. It's something that just grows. And so we need to use that as a way of saying, let's just throw what everybody thinks about outcomes out the window and try to do something a little bit different. So why should we kill outcomes? Well, they want it, not us, and they want it to prove that their money is being invested effectively. In the years that I've worked in the sector, I've seen the relationship between nonprofits and the funding community change. It used to be that the nonprofits would see something in the community that they wanted to change or they wanted to build on or whatever. And they'd go to the funders and say, hey, we've got this idea. We've seen this happen and we think we can do something about it with this. What do you think? Would you give us a little bit of money to make that work? And the funders would go off into the back room, smoke a cigar, and come back out and say, yeah, sure. Or nah, not, we're going to give you that money. Then things started to change, and this concept of donor-centered philanthropy began to grow, and it began to be a little bit of a partnership. And then, we go to the donors and say, hey, we really know that you're really interested in this issue and that you want to see this kind of an outcome. Well, we think we're doing that. So maybe we can work together by having you give us the money, and then we'll go out and do the work. Then it got even worse. It became strategic philanthropy, another thing that Shambra really doesn't like. And that's where the funders say, hey, this is what needs to happen in your community. So if you choose to do what we want you to do, we might give you the money to do it. So it became that the funders led things. And that's, again, they're using outcomes to do that, and they're driving things through using outcomes. And it's changed the relationship. Donor-centered philanthropy is wrong. You should be looking to what Voulez, if you don't know Voulez, he's really got a great blog called Nonprofit AF, and go to it immediately. He speaks truth to power with a sense of humor. And he calls it community-centered fundraising. It's not about what you as the donor want. It's not about what we as the nonprofit want. It's about what the community wants. So let's work together on that. Tracking outcomes is costly. It's time-consuming. And it's reporting outcomes is costly and it's time consuming. There's a good organization called Red F that had a concept that they wanted organizations to track outcomes, and they invested time and people over a number of years to work with the nonprofit. And only when the nonprofit was doing it as second nature would Red F move on, let them go, and move on to something else. So here's my idea. Let's change the narrative. Let's talk about changing the narrative. I was sharing this with Brett a little while ago. One organization I was working with was it's called the Peace Learning Academy. It was in Milwaukee, and I was the board president when we were having this discussion of how do we change the narrative from being, let's stop violence, to being about how do we promote peace. Let's not invest in stopping the violence. Let's invest in promoting peace. What are the things that make people peaceful, and how do we invest in that? Another example of this one is an organization that I was working with in an area called 53206. It's a zip code in Milwaukee, and there was a movie made about it, about promoting how bad a neighborhood this was. What the Dominican Center knew is that it's not like that. That actually the people who live there are very proud of their neighborhood and really like it. The kids in the neighborhood aren't just roaming the streets. They really want to be part of the community and want to help grow the community and become leaders in that community. So what the Dominican Center did was they went to the city of Milwaukee and said, give us a little bit of money. And what we're going to do is, with this 2-block area, we're going to work with the residents, the people in their homes, find out what the residents want to do to their homes to make them look better, to make them feel more like a home, and give them the money to do it, and give them the artisans, the plumbers, the roofers, whatever. And they created this 2-block long, beautiful neighborhood that demonstrates the pride that the residents of 53206 actually take in their community. The kids, they went to the kids and said, go door to door, raise and talk about voting, get people to go out and vote. And about 2 elections ago, that neighborhood, 53206, had the biggest voter turnout of any area in the state of Wisconsin. And it was all because they were helping the kids go door to door and become members of the community that they wanted to be. So now they've begun to change the narrative about 53206 from what it had been in that movie to what they already knew about the neighborhood. It took the city of Milwaukee to help them. It took the League of Women Voters to help them. It took Milwaukee Repertory Theater to help them. But what they're able to say is, yes, the image of what's going on here is changing. The narrative about this neighborhood is changing, and we've had a hand in that. Other people have had a hand in it too, but we've had a hand in that. Support us and help us do this, continue to do this. So that's kind of what I talk about. Instead of outcomes, can we talk about another softer, more encompassing way of measuring the success that we have? And I can't come up with a better phrase than change the narrative. I'm sure there is a better phrase, there is a better way of thinking about it. And I'd love to hear from you. So, that's just my idea. You know things about your community that no one else knows. What is that? How do you change the image of the community that you're serving? How do you build a better story? How do you build on what's working, on what's successful? How do you change what isn't? And change the narrative? And how do you share that information? Funders keep the information and put it in a drawer. They put the outcomes that you've shared with them in a drawer. How can you turn that around, what you've learned, how the narrative has changed, and put it back into the community that you're serving, so that they can take ownership of it, that community can take ownership of it, and use it to continue the momentum in a positive direction. The outcome measurements, the whatever measures of success, mean nothing if you put them in a drawer, if you put them in an annual report, and don't put them out into the community and put them to work. So that's my idea.
Mhm.
Um, I think we're actually out of time since we started late, and I apologize for that because we had a technical issue on my side. That was me. So if you have questions, if you have thoughts, I'd love to hear them in the last few seconds that we've got.
No questions, but I've got one. So
Yeah.
I'm a business guy, so you excuse the ignorance. But they teach us in pretty much every business thing. If you can't measure it, you're not managing it. How do you manage that, or how do you suggest that we manage that?
I don't know the answer. Again, how do we do the thing about changing the narrative? In some ways, it's going to be easier. It's going to be easy because we could look at, for example, what are the newspapers writing about that neighborhood, that 53206?
Mhm.
Are they writing positive stories, or are they writing negative stories? And so it's not going to be an empirical measurement. It's not going to be, there's one better article than one bet. There's now 5 positive articles instead of 2 negative ones.
Mhm.
It's not going to be that empirical. It's going to be really just that it's that enlightenment. We know it when we've achieved it.
Right. Okay. Well, terrific. Well, again, Rob is going to be teaching board governance for new board directors on May 28th. And we'd love you to join us for that. And we have a coupon code, professional20. So if you want 20% off that, that would be great. You certainly can have it. And thank you, Rob, for doing this. That was terrific. I was interested in it, and I'm sure everybody else was as well.
I hope
Uh,
so.
we're having
If you
this
want
in.
to, here's some contact information on me. So if you want
Oh,
to
great.
reach out, and the fwdsteps.com is not a very active website at this point, but you can always email me at my name, robert.meiksins@gmail.com. I'm love to work with you, love to talk with you, whatever we can do.
I love that T-shirt, by the way.
Thank you.
Um, okay. Well, thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, everybody.